Take a purple Skittle, pop it in your mouth. If you're in America, you're tasting grape. But if you're in England, Australia, basically anywhere else in the world, that exact same candy tastes completely different. It tastes like a fruit that 99.9% of Americans have never even tried. And the reason you've never tried it is because the United States government spent almost a century making sure you couldn't. This is the story of how one tiny berry was erased from an entire country's memory.
Act 1. The berry that built a world.
The year is 1629. English settlers arrive at Massachusetts Bay Colony carrying seeds, tools, livestock, and a small dark berry called the blackcurrant. Now, if you're European, you know exactly what a blackcurrant is. It's everywhere. Jams, juices, candies, medicines. In the UK, it's basically the national flavor. But if you're American, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. And that's not an accident. That's by design. If not by design, at least by choice. Back in colonial America, blackcurrants did just fine. Farmers grew them. Merchants sold currant jellies right alongside grape and strawberry preserves. By the late 1800s, there were nearly 7,400 acres of currants and gooseberries under cultivation, with New York leading the way. But here's the thing about America in the 1800s. There was something the country valued far, far more than any berry: trees. Specifically, the eastern white pine.
White pine was, without exaggeration, the most important natural resource in early American history.
These trees were monsters, 200 feet tall, 5 feet across at the base, perfectly straight. The British Royal Navy used them for ship masts. They were strong, light, and flexible enough to survive ocean storms. In fact, the British Crown was so obsessed with American white pines that they passed a law saying the best trees belonged to the king, not to the farmer on whose land they grew. The king. That didn't go over well. There was actually a thing called the Pine Tree Riot in 1772. Settlers in New Hampshire refused to give up their pines. And historians argue that disputes over pine trees contributed to the American Revolution almost as much as disagreements over tea and taxes. After independence, the lumber industry exploded. By 1790, New England alone was exporting 36 million feet of pine boards a year. White pine built American houses, American ships, American cities. It was, quite literally, the backbone of the nation. So when something threatened the pines, America was going to fight backwards.
Act 2. The fungus that changed everything.
Here's where it gets interesting. By the late 1800s, America had been cutting down white pines so fast that nurseries couldn't keep up. So they started importing cheap seedlings from Europe, from Germany specifically. And those seedlings carried a passenger, a fungus called white pine blister rust.
The blister rust was first detected in 1909 on a New York plantation of white pine trees grown from German seedlings.
Now, this fungus was nasty. It created these yellowish, swollen lesions on the bark, almost like the tree was breaking out in boils, and slowly, branch by branch, the pine would die. But here's the twist that changed history. This fungus cannot jump from pine tree to pine tree. It needs a middleman, a second host to complete its life cycle, and that second host was the blackcurrant. The moment scientists figured this out, the lumber industry panicked. White pine was a billion-dollar resource. The blackcurrant was a berry most Americans didn't even care that much about. The math was simple, brutal but simple. In 1911, the federal government banned the cultivation, sale, and transport of blackcurrants across the entire United States. But they didn't just ban them. They sent crews, actual government teams with backpacks full of chemical spray, fanning out across the country field by field, destroying every blackcurrant plant they could find. Later, members of the Civilian Conservation Corps carried on the eradication.
Wait, the government literally sent people to poison a fruit? Like door to door?
Field by field, state by state. And by the late 1920s, the USDA made their position crystal clear. In the 1927 Yearbook of Agriculture, they wrote, and I'm quoting here,
"The United States can do without them better than it can suffer the blister rust losses."
And just like that, the blackcurrant was gone, ripped out of American soil, erased from American grocery stores, and within a generation, erased from American memory.
Act 3. The flavor that vanished.
Now, here's where this story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. The ban on blackcurrants happened to coincide with the birth of something massive, the American candy and soda industry. Think about it. In the early 1900s, companies were figuring out what flavors to put in their new products. Lemon from Florida and California orchards, easy. Cherry? Sure. Orange? Of course. And purple? Well, in Europe, where the blackcurrant was thriving, purple meant blackcurrant. That was the obvious choice. But in America, blackcurrants didn't exist anymore. So American candy makers reached for something else. The Concord grape. And that decision, made because of a fungus, a lumber industry, and a government ban, permanently split the world in two. To this day, if you eat a purple candy in America, it tastes like grape. But in England, Australia, India, most of Europe, that same color tastes like blackcurrant. Americans don't even know they're missing something. To make it even more confusing, in the 1920s, a dried grape from Greece started being sold in America as a currant. So Americans didn't just forget what a blackcurrant was. They started using the word currant to describe a completely different fruit.
So Americans lost the fruit and the word for it?
Exactly, the erasure was total. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the blackcurrant was about to have its finest hour. When World War II broke out, German U-boats attacked British cargo ships, making it nearly impossible to import oranges and other vitamin C-rich fruits. The British government needed a solution. Fast. And they found one growing right in their own backyard, the blackcurrant. It turned out that blackcurrants have 4 times more vitamin C than oranges. A scientist named Vernon Charley at the University of Bristol had already developed a blackcurrant syrup in 1933. When the war started, the government encouraged massive blackcurrant cultivation and started distributing blackcurrant cordial to children and pregnant women for free as a vitamin C supplement. That product would eventually become Ribena, one of the most iconic drinks in British history. To this day, 90% of all blackcurrants grown in Britain go to making Ribena. So while British kids were growing up with the taste of blackcurrant baked into their childhood, American kids had no idea the flavor even existed. Same berry, 2 completely different destinies, separated by a fungus and a government ban.
Act 4. The Man Who Brought It Back.
The federal ban on blackcurrants was quietly lifted in 1966. Scientists had developed disease-resistant pine varieties. They'd figured out the fungus only spread when currants grew in close proximity to pines. The threat was basically over. But here's the thing about erasing something from an entire culture's memory. Even when you bring it back, nobody notices. Individual states were left to make their own rules, and many of them just kept the ban going. Nobody lobbied to change it. Why would they? Americans didn't know what they were missing. A Cornell University professor named Marvin Pritz estimated that less than 0.1% of Americans have ever eaten a blackcurrant. Think about that. In a country of over 300 million people, almost none of them have tasted one of the most popular fruits on the planet. Then, in the late 1990s, a man named Greg Quinn bought a farm in New York's Hudson Valley. Quinn had spent time running a restaurant in Bavaria, Germany, where he discovered the blackcurrant for the first time, and he was obsessed. He partnered with researchers at Cornell University, confirmed that modern blackcurrant varieties could be grown safely without threatening pines, and then he did something no one had bothered to do in almost a century. He lobbied the New York state government to overturn the ban. And in 2003, he won. In his own words, but not his voice,
"When I started this right after the law changed, Americans for the most part did not know what blackcurrants were. This may be the last product that everybody knows about, except the U.S.
Today, Quinn grows 10,000 blackcurrant bushes on his Hudson Valley farm. He sells 15 different blackcurrant products under his brand Currant C, but he admits he's still, in his own words, pushing the rock up the hill. Because after 100 years of absence, the American palate has moved on. Purple means grape now, that's just what it is. And the blackcurrant, a fruit that was once as common in America as the strawberry, remains a stranger in its own former home. So next time you eat a purple Skittle or drink a grape soda or bite into grape-flavored anything, just remember that flavor, that specific very American flavor, it only exists because over 100 years ago, the government decided that a tree was worth more than a berry. And by the time anyone realized what was lost, nobody could even remember what they were supposed to be missing. I hope you enjoyed it. Like and subscribe Awesome Food Tales.